Boston Mountains, Arkansas, October, 1889. On the cleared slope of an Ozark cutover, William McConnell was building something that made no sense. To the handful of settlers scratching a living from the rocky soil near the White River, it looked like sheer foolishness. He had laid a massive oak platform, 30 feet wide and 16 feet deep, but instead of starting a single cabin in the middle, he was hewing logs for two separate smaller rooms at either end. Between them, a 12-foot gap of open air remained, a naked invitation to the winter wind. Jedediah Stone, whose own cabin was a testament to the hard-won logic of chink and daub, spat a stream of tobacco juice near the foundation. "McConnell," he called out, his voice thick with concern, "that breezeway's going to funnel the north wind right through your soul. You'll freeze solid come January." McConnell, a man of few words, with the quiet eyes of someone who has seen older, colder places, simply sighted down a white oak log and continued to score it with his adze. "The roof will cover it," he said, not looking up. The roof only made it stranger. By November, the two 14 by 16-foot log pens were complete, and a single, continuous roof line stretched over the entire structure, turning the gap into a cavernous, open-ended tunnel through the heart of the house. It was a Dogtrot cabin, a form known in the lower South, but never this high in the mountains, and never with the feature that drew the most scorn: a single, colossal, stone chimney rising dead center in the breezeway. It stood like a monument to bad planning, a 6-foot square pillar of limestone that seemed to belong to neither room. Herschel Vardaman, the Boone County building inspector, made a special trip out from Harrison. He was a man who believed in codes, in plumb lines, and in the accumulated wisdom of frontier building. He saw none of it here. He walked the length of the open-air hall, his boots echoing on the oak planks. "One chimney, McConnell?" Vardaman asked, his tone less a question than an accusation. "It's not even in a room. You plan on warming the whole Ozark Plateau with your fire?" Other men who had stopped to watch chuckled. "That's his Irish foolishness," someone muttered. "Thinks he's building a castle?" Vardaman pulled a small, leather-bound book from his coat. The 1885 Arkansas Homestead Code is clear. A habitable dwelling requires a proper hearth and flue within the heated space. This is a porch ornament. When I make my report, I'll have to cite this. It's a violation. William McConnell finally paused. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of a calloused hand and looked at the inspector. He pointed with his chin toward the massive stone structure. "It has 2 fireboxes," he said, his Ulster accent softening the words, "one for each room." Vardaman peered into the dark openings on either side of the stone column. It was true. 2 distinct hearths were built back-to-back into the single chimney mass, but the arrangement only deepened the inspector's certainty of the man's madness. One fire, set in a grate that sat between the 2 openings, was meant to serve both. It was an absurdity. A fire needed to be in a room to heat it. A fire in a breezeway was just a bonfire. What did this Scots-Irish carpenter, a newcomer from the damp green of County Antrim, understand about the physics of heat and stone that Herschel Vardaman, a man who had inspected every successful homestead from Boone County to Newton, had so completely missed? The answer to that question would not come in arguments or blueprints. It would arrive on the back of the most brutal winter the Boston Mountains had seen in a generation, a winter that would test every assumption and break every rule, except the ones written in stone and fire. This is the story of how one man's memory of an ancient building tradition provided a revolutionary answer to the killing cold of the American frontier. If you stay with me, I promise you will learn not just how he did it, but the powerful scientific principle he mastered, a principle that can make our own homes more comfortable and efficient today. So subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments, What's the most ingenious solution you've ever seen for staying warm? William McConnell was not a frontiersman. He was not a farmer nor a hunter who knew the ways of the Ozark woods. Before arriving in Arkansas in 1887 with his wife Maeve and their two young children, Finn and Siobhan, he had never felled a tree larger than a sapling. He was a carpenter, but of a different sort. His hands were trained not on the vast, raw timber of a new continent, but on the tight, economical joinery of an old one. He had spent his youth in Ulster, in County Antrim, working with his father not on log cabins, but on stone farmhouses and passage hearth homes. His world had been one of scarcity, where fuel was precious and warmth was a carefully managed resource. He understood the language of stone, the slow, steady breath of a heated flue, the subtle art of coaxing a single peat fire to warm two rooms through a shared wall. The physical objects of his trade were not the broad axe and the froe, but the trowel, the stone hammer, and the intricate knowledge of how a chimney's mass could become a reservoir of heat. Their first winter in the Ozarks had nearly broken them. They had built a standard cabin, a single 16 by 18-foot pen, just as their neighbors advised. They chinked it with mud and grass, built a big fieldstone fireplace on the gable end, and fed it a relentless diet of oak and hickory. It was a failure. The cabin was a study in contrasts, a scorching 7-foot semicircle near the fire, and a landscape of creeping misery everywhere else. Maeve's cast-iron pot hook, a wedding gift from her mother, grew so brittle from the repeated cycles of intense heat and deep cold that one morning, holding a stew, the S-curve simply snapped, dumping their dinner into the ashes. At the small church in Elkhorn, the preacher's ink froze solid in its well during a winter baptism, the name of the child left half-written in the church register. Maeve told William a story that circulated among the women, of a neighbor who took her best wool blanket outside to shake the frost from it, and it cracked down the middle like a sheet of ice. That first winter, William spent more time feeding the fire than he did sleeping. The children, Finn and Siobhan, slept in their coats, huddled together in the coldest corner, ironically, the furthest from the drafts that whistled around the fireplace. The problem, as William came to understand it, wasn't the cold outside. The problem was the design inside. The standard Ozark cabin was a thermodynamic sieve. The gable-end chimney, massive as it was a terrible engine for heating a room. Most of its stone surface area radiated heat outwards into the empty, frozen air. The fire's radiant heat warmed only what it could see, leaving the corners of the room frigid. The hot air that did rise was immediately sucked up the flue, pulling in drafts of icy air through every tiny gap in the chinking. The cabin never achieved equilibrium. It was in a constant, losing battle, burning through a mountain of wood just to keep the frost off the water bucket. He watched his neighbors suffer the same fate. Jedediah Stone's family sealed their windows with greased paper and stuffed rags into the walls, yet his wife was bedridden for a month with a lung-deep cough. Silas Putnam, a farmer on the next ridge, lost 3 calves and a dozen chickens, frozen solid in a barn that was no colder than his own house. The frontier solution was always more. More wood, a bigger fire, another blanket. It was a strategy of brute force, not of wisdom. William knew there had to be a better way. The memory of the Antrim passage hearths haunted him. Those homes, built for a damp, chilling cold, not the dry, searing freeze of the Ozarks, were never scorching and never frozen. They were just warm, evenly, calmly, steadily warm. The fire wasn't a raging beast in the corner. It was a quiet pulse at the center of the house. He started drawing in the dirt floor with a stick, sketching out the design that was forming in his mind. 2 rooms, for living and sleeping. But instead of being joined, they would be held apart by a central mass. The chimney wouldn't be on the edge of the house, bleeding its heat to the wilderness. It would be the very heart of the home, encased by the living spaces it was meant to serve. Maeve watched him, her brow furrowed. "Two wee houses, William?" she asked, her voice gentle. "With the dogs running between?" He nodded. "The fire will be between, lass. The fire will be the wall." She looked at the drawing, at the two small squares connected by a central block, and she trusted him. He was not a man given to whims. If he was going to build something this strange, he had a reason born of hard-earned knowledge. The mockery of his neighbors was a constant, buzzing annoyance through the late summer and fall of 1889. But William McConnell wasn't building for them. He was building for the memory of a cracked wool blanket and the sound of his children coughing in their sleep. The conventional Ozark cabin, the type Jedediah Stone championed and Herschel Vardaman codified, was a masterpiece of rapid construction from available materials. It was not, however, a masterpiece of thermal design. Its failure was rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of how heat behaves. The settlers saw fire as a source of direct radiant warmth, like a miniature sun in the corner of the room. They built massive fireplaces on the exterior gable-end walls for two logical, yet flawed, reasons. It kept the fire and any potential chimney collapse away from the center of the living space, and it was easier to construct the heavy stone foundation and chimney on the outside of the log structure. This design, however, ensured that over half of the chimney's thermal energy was wasted. A typical fieldstone chimney face might reach 300 degrees Fahrenheit, pouring radiant heat into the room. But the other three sides of that same chimney were facing the brutal outside air. They were, in effect, giant radiators heating the forest. The heat that did make it into the cabin was intense but localized. A person sitting directly in front of the fire would be sweating, while a person 10 feet away would be shivering. This created powerful convection currents. The air heated by the fire would rise, and as it cooled near the far walls and ceiling, it would sink, pulling cold air across the floor toward the fire to be reheated. This constant circulation is what created the notorious drafts of a frontier cabin. It wasn't just outside air seeping in. It was the room's own air, turned into a relentless, chilly current by the poorly placed heat source. Furthermore, the fire's voracious appetite for oxygen had to be satisfied. A roaring log fire can consume hundreds of cubic feet of air per minute. In a tightly chinked cabin, this created a powerful negative pressure, sucking frigid outside air in through every available crack, around the door, the window frames, and the gaps in the chinking. The very act of making a bigger fire to fight the cold actively pulled more cold into the house. It was a vicious cycle. The settlers were, in essence, trying to heat a box, while simultaneously running a powerful exhaust fan that was drawing in Arctic air. During that first winter, William had measured the effect. He'd placed tin cups of water around their small cabin. The one on the mantelpiece, 3 feet from the fire, stayed liquid. The one on the dining table, 8 feet away, developed a skin of ice. The one in the corner by the children's bed, 16 feet away, froze solid. The cabin didn't have a single temperature. It had a dozen, all of them fighting each other. This was the universal experience. The frontier cabin wasn't a warm space with cold spots. It was a cold space with a single, temporary hotspot. It relied entirely on the continuous, roaring combustion of fuel. The moment the fire died down to coals, the house began a rapid plunge toward the outside temperature. There was no thermal storage, no flywheel of warmth to carry the house through the night. The heat existed only as long as the flames danced. This is why keeping the fire going was a matter of life and death, an exhausting, round-the-clock vigil. It was this fundamental, exhausting inefficiency that William McConnell set out to defeat. The construction of the McConnell Dogtrot began in August of 1889. The foundation was the first sign of its radical nature. Instead of two small foundations, William and his hired hands laid a single, massive one. Great oak logs, a foot in diameter, were squared and laid as sills to form a perfect 30 by 16-foot rectangle. This common platform was crucial. It ensured the two living spaces and the central chimney would settle as a single, unified unit, preventing cracks and separations over time. Upon this platform, he raised the two log pens, or rooms, simultaneously. They were modest, each 14 feet wide and 16 feet deep, built of hewn poplar and oak logs, saddle-notched at the corners. As the walls went up, the 12-foot gap between them became more pronounced. Neighbors would stop on their way to the mill, scratching their heads. "Building two cabins, William?" Silas Putnam asked one afternoon. "Expecting company?" "Just one house," William replied, his focus on the fit of a log. The real spectacle began when the log walls reached a height of 8 feet. In the center of the breezeway, on the heavy oak platform, William's masons began to lay the foundation for the chimney. It was not the slender, tapered chimney of a typical cabin. It was a fortress. The base was a perfect 6 by 6 foot square of native limestone, mortared with a mixture of clay, sand, and lime. The stones were immense, some weighing over 200 pounds, wrestled into place with levers and raw manpower. This was when Herschel Vardaman made his first, unofficial visit. He watched the masons for an hour, his hands on his hips. Finally, he approached McConnell. "I've seen 100 chimneys built in this county, McConnell. Never one this big, and never one out in the open air. The first winter frost is going to heave that stone and crack it wide open." "The foundation is sound," William said calmly. "It's on the main sills." "It's not the foundation, it's the exposure," Vardaman insisted. "A chimney needs the house to protect it. This thing is naked to the elements." He pointed a finger at the growing monolith. "And what's this about 2 flues? My man at the land office says you filed a plan for a single chimney. The code requires separate flues for separate hearths." "It's one chimney," William repeated patiently, "with one central flue. The fireboxes are back to back." Vardaman shook his head in disbelief and walked away, making notes in his book. The conversation was reported all over the county within days. McConnell was not just building a strange house. He was now in open defiance of the county inspector. The mockery took on a sharper, more official edge. As the chimney rose, its internal structure became clear. The masons built 2 distinct fireboxes, each about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep, opening into the respective rooms. But instead of leading to separate flues, the smoke shelf at the back of each firebox channeled smoke upwards into a single, large, shared flue, about 2 feet square, that ran up the core of the massive stone structure. A heavy iron grate was designed to sit in an opening between the 2 fireboxes, allowing a single fire to radiate heat into both hearths simultaneously. By late October, the roof was on. Rafters spanned the entire 30-foot width of the structure, from the outer wall of one pen to the outer wall of the other, creating a single, protective covering over the 2 rooms and the open breezeway. The Dogtrot was now a complete, baffling entity. It had the profile of a single large house, but a 12-foot wide river of air flowed through its center, and at its heart stood the stone column, a silent gray sentinel, its purpose still a matter of intense and skeptical debate. The total cost was $140, a significant sum, but William had sold his previous, failed cabin to a newcomer to fund it. He was betting everything on this design. The mockery lasted through the fall. The validation would have to wait for the cold. To understand the genius of William McConnell's design, you have to understand a concept that was foreign to most 19th century builders: thermal mass. The problem with a standard cabin wasn't a lack of fire, it was a lack of a thermal battery. McConnell's entire structure was designed to create one. The heart of the system was the 6 by 6 foot limestone chimney. Let's do the math. A cubic foot of the limestone found in the Boston Mountains weighs approximately 150 pounds. For every foot of its height, McConnell's chimney contained 36 cubic feet of stone, 6 feet by 6 feet by 1 foot. That's 5,400 pounds of stone per vertical foot. A chimney standing 16 feet tall from the floor to the roof line would contain over 43 tons of solid rock. Now consider the physics of heat storage. The specific heat of limestone is about 0.22 British thermal units per pound per degree Fahrenheit. This means it takes 0.22 British thermal units of energy to raise the temperature of 1 pound of limestone by 1 degree. While this number seems small, the sheer mass of the chimney turns it into a colossal energy sponge. To raise the temperature of that 43-ton chimney by just 50 degrees Fahrenheit, say from 40 degrees Fahrenheit to a comfortable 90 degrees Fahrenheit, would require over 500,000 BTUs of energy. This is where the single fire in the central grate came in. As it burned, it did two things. First, it sent radiant heat directly into the two rooms through the firebox openings, providing immediate warmth. But more importantly, it sent superheated exhaust gas up to 800 degrees Fahrenheit, roaring up the central flue. This hot gas transferred a massive amount of its energy into the surrounding stone. The chimney didn't just vent smoke, it actively absorbed the heat from that smoke along its entire length. Unlike a thin metal stovepipe that sheds heat instantly, the thick stone walls of the flue absorbed this energy slowly, steadily, over hours. The chimney was, in effect, charging itself with heat. The card notes it stored 8,400 BTUs per linear foot. This massive reservoir of warmth then began to do its real work. It started re-radiating that stored heat, not into the cold outside air, but into the two rooms it was nestled between. The stone faces of the chimney inside each room became giant, gentle radiators. They wouldn't be hot enough to burn you, perhaps only 90 or 100 degrees. But they would pour out a steady, constant stream of warmth for hours and hours after the fire had died down. The system defeated the two great failures of the conventional cabin. First, because the heat source was central and radiated from a large surface area, it heated the rooms evenly. There were no frigid corners or scorching hot spots. The entire living space reached a stable, comfortable temperature. Second, it solved the problem of the thermal flywheel. The house was no longer dependent on a constantly roaring fire. Once the stone mass was charged with heat, it would continue to warm the home for 24 hours or more, coasting through the night on the energy it had stored during the day. This meant a smaller, more efficient fire was needed, saving immense amounts of fuel and labor. McConnell hadn't just built a chimney between two rooms. He had built a heat engine, where the fuel was wood, and the engine block was 43 tons of Arkansas limestone. The Breezeway, the feature most mocked by his neighbors, was actually a critical part of the design. It acted as an insulating break, ensuring that the only path for heat to travel was from the central stone core into the two sealed, protected log pens. He wasn't warming the outdoors. He was capturing the fire's energy and holding it captive right where his family lived. The cold arrived on the third week of January, 1890. It didn't drift in. It fell upon the Boston Mountains like a hammer. A vast dome of Arctic high pressure settled over the region, and for 9 consecutive nights, the temperature in the valleys plunged to 22 degrees below zero. The sky was painfully clear, allowing any daytime warmth to radiate away into space the moment the sun dipped below the ridges. A brutal downslope drainage of frigid air poured off the mountainsides, settling into the hollows and along the White River, where the settlers had built their homes. A thick, crystalline hoarfrost, 3 inches deep in places, grew on every surface, fence rails, pump handles, and bare tree branches. It was a dry, searing, absolute cold that found every weakness. For the conventional cabins in the valley, it was a catastrophe. At Jedediah Stone's place, the mud and grass chinking between his logs, baked dry by the summer sun, had shrunk and cracked. The minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit air didn't seep in. It knifed through dozens of tiny gaps. Inside, despite a fire that consumed a quarter quart of wood a day, the temperature never rose above freezing away from the hearth. They lived in a small bubble of survivable warmth, wrapped in every blanket they owned. Their water buckets were solid blocks of ice. To get a drink, they had to chip off pieces and melt them in a pot over the fire. At Silas Putnam's farm, the situation was worse. He had a newer, better cabin with a glass window. The single pane of glass, with no storm window to protect it, became a sheet of interior ice 2 inches thick. The cold radiating from it was so intense that it felt like an open window. His family abandoned their main room entirely, moving their bedding and themselves into their small loft, hoping the rising heat from the fire below would offer some protection. It offered little. The sounds of the cold were everywhere. The sharp crack of a tree limb freezing and splitting, the groan of roofing nails contracting in the cold, the constant whistling moan of wind through invisible cracks. It was a siege. But at William McConnell's Dogtrot, there was silence. Inside the western pen, which served as their kitchen and living space, a profound and steady warmth permeated the air. The single fire in the central grate was kept to a steady, moderate burn, not a frantic roar. The interior face of the massive stone chimney was warm to the touch, a 6-foot-wide wall of gentle, radiant heat. Maeve worked at her table, kneading dough for bread. The children, Finn and Siobhan, sat on a rug on the floor, playing with carved wooden animals. They were in their shirt sleeves. The contrast was absolute. The numerical difference was stark. While Jedediah Stone's cabin struggled to stay at 30 degrees Fahrenheit, the temperature inside McConnell's living space held a steady 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But the image contrast was even more powerful. At the Putnams, a crock of butter on their kitchen shelf was frozen so hard it could have been used as a doorstop. At the McConnells, Maeve opened a small wooden butter churn, and the butter inside was soft and spreadable. The very laws of physics seemed different inside these walls. The cold had laid siege to the valley. But here, in this strange house with a hole through its middle, the siege had been broken. The house wasn't fighting the cold. It was ignoring it. The 43 tons of limestone, charged with the heat of the small fire, was doing its silent work, radiating a calm, unyielding warmth that the Arctic air outside could not defeat. The proof of the design wasn't in a thermometer reading. It was in the impossible normalcy of life continuing, undisturbed, in the heart of a frozen world. On the 5th day of the deep freeze, Herschel Vardaman buttoned his greatcoat, wrapped a wool scarf over the lower half of his face, and mounted his mule. He had a duty to perform. The citation against William McConnell for violating the 1885 Homestead Code was written, signed, and ready to be served. It was a long, cold ride to the cutover, but the law was the law, and Vardaman was its servant. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. His mustache was a block of ice within minutes, and the leather of his saddle was stiff as wood. As he neared McConnell's property, he could see the house, its roof heavy with frost, the breezeway a dark tunnel against the blinding white of the landscape. It looked deserted, a failed experiment frozen in place. He felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The man's foolishness had met its inevitable end. He urged his mule, Pat, onto the wooden platform of the Dogtrot, intending to ride right up to the door of what he assumed was the main room. It was a mistake. The oak planks of the breezeway, exposed to the elements, were coated in a treacherous, invisible film of ice from the breath of the animals that had sheltered there. The mule's iron-shod hooves shot out from under it. With a panicked bray, the animal went down hard, pinning Vardaman's leg beneath it. A searing pain shot through his ankle. He cried out, wrestling to free himself as the panicked mule struggled to regain its footing. The door to the right-hand pen flew open, and William McConnell ran out, not even bothering with a coat. He calmed the mule with a quiet voice, and with surprising strength helped the animal to its feet. "Mr. Vardaman," William said, his voice level, "are you all right?" "My ankle," Vardaman gasped, the pain making him dizzy. "I think it's broken." McConnell assessed the situation instantly. "Come inside. Maeve will see to it." He put a shoulder under Vardaman's arm and helped him hobble through the open door into the eastern room, the family's sleeping quarters. The moment he crossed the threshold, Vardaman's world tilted. He had braced himself for the familiar, biting cold of a frontier cabin's antechamber. He expected to see his breath plume, to feel the familiar damp chill of a room losing its battle with winter. He felt none of it. What he felt was warmth. A deep, pervasive, even warmth that seemed to radiate from the very walls. There was no fire in this room, yet it was as comfortable as a summer afternoon. He looked around bewildered. The beds were neatly made, the air was still and dry. He ran a bare hand down the log wall. It was cool, but not cold. Then he turned and saw the source. The interior wall was not logs, but the 6-foot-wide expanse of dressed limestone, the back of the great central chimney. He placed his palm flat against it. He expected to feel the biting cold of stone that had been exposed to a minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit night. He expected the deep, penetrating chill that would numb his hand in seconds. Instead, the stone was warm. Not hot, but profoundly, unmistakably warm, like a sun-baked rock in late spring. The sensation was so contrary to a lifetime of experience that for a moment his mind refused to process it. "The fire. Where is the fire?" he stammered, looking for a stove, a hearth, anything. "In the other room," McConnell said simply, helping him to a chair. "Through the wall." After Maeve had determined his ankle was only badly sprained and had wrapped it tightly, William helped him across the icy breezeway into the other pen, the living room. The shock was repeated, but in reverse. Here was the fire, a small, calm fire of oak logs burning peacefully in the grate, and here was the same impossible warmth, the same still air. He looked at the identical stone wall, the other face of the great chimney, and understood. The heat from this one, modest fire was being captured by the stone and distributed to both rooms. The proof, the detail that shattered his professional certainty, sat on the small stone shelf of the mantelpiece in this room, and on its twin in the bedroom he had just left. On each shelf was a simple crockery bowl. Inside each was a serving of champ, a Scots-Irish dish of mashed potatoes with green onions and butter. A pool of melted butter glistened on top of the potatoes in both bowls. In every other house in Boone County, a bowl of food left more than 5 feet from the fire would have been frozen solid within an hour. Here, 2 separate bowls, in 2 separate rooms, separated by 12 feet of Arctic breezeway, were both being kept perfectly, evenly warm by a single fire. It was impossible. It was a miracle. It was simply better engineering. Vardaman looked from the bowl of champ to William McConnell's quiet, waiting face. The official citation felt like a fool's errand in his pocket. He had come to serve a notice of violation to a man he considered a fool. Instead, he had found the warmest, most comfortable home in all of Arkansas. He slowly pulled the paper from his coat, looked at it for a long moment, and then tore it in half. He looked at the massive stone wall that formed the spine of the house. "You didn't build a cabin, McConnell," Vardaman said, his voice filled with a new kind of respect. "You built a hearth with rooms attached to it." The news of Herschel Vardaman's conversion spread faster than the cold. The story of his fall, his injury, and his astonishment became a local legend. Vardaman, a man whose word was law in matters of construction, became McConnell's most vocal advocate. He didn't just retract the citation, he began to actively promote the design. When he returned to his office in Harrison, he didn't file a violation. Instead, he spent 2 days drafting a detailed addendum to his report on the McConnell homestead. He described the central chimney, the back-to-back fireboxes, and the astonishing efficiency of the system. He used his own experience as proof, detailing the even warmth in both rooms and the impossible fact of the 2 bowls of champ. His advocacy reached the Boone County Farmers' Grange, a cooperative of local farmers and homesteaders always searching for better methods. In their March 1890 newsletter, a small publication printed on a hand-cranked press, there appeared a new article, "A Novel Method for the Warming of Dwellings" by W. McConnell, with notes by H. Vardaman, County Inspector. The article included a simplified schematic of the Dogtrot layout, showing the central chimney and the shared flue. It described the principle of thermal mass in simple, practical terms. The stone holds the heat of the day's fire and gives it back through the night, warming 2 rooms with the fuel of 1. The impact was immediate, particularly among the other Scots-Irish families in the region, who recognized the echo of a building tradition from their homeland. That spring and summer, a flurry of construction began. 6 families, scattered across Boone and Newton counties, abandoned their plans for conventional cabins and started laying the wide foundations for McConnell-style dogtrots. Jedediah Stone, humbled by the memory of his family's winter suffering, was one of the first. He swallowed his pride and spent 2 days with William, taking careful measurements of the chimney and making notes on the construction of the flue. The design was adapted and modified. Some built with sawn lumber instead of logs, others adjusted the size of the breezeway. But the core principle, the massive central heat-storing chimney serving 2 distinct living spaces, remained the same. By the time the first snows of the following winter fell, a half-dozen of these strange, efficient houses dotted the Ozark hillsides, each a testament to the quiet carpenter's revolutionary idea. The fuel savings were dramatic. Families reported cutting their winter wood consumption by more than half, freeing up weeks of hard labor for other tasks. More importantly, their homes were transformed from drafty survival shelters into places of genuine comfort and security. The idea, carried by word of mouth and the small Grange newsletter, became a part of the regional building vocabulary. It never fully replaced the standard cabin, but for those willing to embrace its unconventional logic, it offered a profound leap forward in quality of life. The Dogtrot, once a symbol of southern heat evasion, was reimagined as a machine for conquering the mountain cold. The McConnell Dogtrot anticipated principles of modern building science by nearly a century. Today, we would call Williams' innovation a form of passive solar design, but using a wood fire instead of the sun. The massive central chimney is what we now call a thermal mass wall or a trombe wall. The concept of separating a building into distinct thermal zones and using a central, radiant heat source is at the cutting edge of energy-efficient home design. William McConnell, with his memories of Antrim passage hearths and his intimate understanding of stone, had stumbled upon a deeply sophisticated and sustainable way to live in a harsh climate. The story of the McConnell Dogtrot is more than a tale of frontier ingenuity. It is a lesson in the nature of perception. To his neighbors, William's creation was 2 separate cabins, inefficiently joined by a drafty hall. They saw the space between things. They saw the gap. William, however, saw the opposite. he saw a single, unified system. He understood that the two rooms were not the point. They were simply the beneficiaries of the great stone heart that beat between them. The structure wasn't defined by the rooms, but by the fire that served them. He didn't build two cabins joined by a hall. He asked one fire to warm both sides. And in the unforgiving cold of an Ozark winter, the landscape rewards not what seems right, but what truly works. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you found this piece of history as fascinating as we do, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of forgotten ingenuity. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen a house with a similar design? Until next time, stay curious. Disclaimer: this video presents historically inspired reconstructions for educational and storytelling purposes. While the techniques and principles are based on real historical practices, the specific characters, names, and events depicted are fictionalized for narrative effect. The application of any building techniques, historical or modern, should be done in accordance with current building codes, safety guidelines, and professional consultation. This content does not constitute professional, technical, or legal advice.